Welcome to Discovering. Isle Royale is the nation's least visited national park, but it is the most revisited national park in the country, and I am here on Isle Royale to experience and find out why.
The secret streams that flow beneath the cliffs of colored stone, forests thick and healthy with birch and pine and oak, surrounded by the greatest lakes this world has ever known. The black bear's awesome presence as he roams the hills and fields, call of the timber wolf, the loon's lonesome trill, the eagle soaring high above, the trout lies deep and still. These are what I treasure, the only way I measure feelings that I have for this fine land. There is so much to discover when you're a long-time lover of northern Michigan.
The first morning on Isle Royale was magical. Fog settled in overnight and covered the quiet island in dew. The only sounds I could hear were water lapping gently on the shore and the island's various birds singing their morning songs and red squirrels stirring in the trees. If you seek solitude, this is the place. Although Isle Royale is the least visited national park in the country, it's the most revisited national park. As soon as I set foot on our first trail on Isle Royale, I knew I would be back. That soon. This morning's peace and quiet confirmed it. Even later into the trip, as I'm stuffed into my sleeping bag, 40 degrees, wearing every layer I brought, I'm totally okay with this situation, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. The question is, why? Isle Royale National Park is a 45-mile-long island located about 55 miles northwest of Copper Harbor, closer to Canada than Michigan. Even though it's considered a part of the Upper Peninsula, many Yoopers have never ventured to the island, including myself, until now.
People in the UP, they know Isle Royale, but they really don't know much else about it, and 9 times out of 10, they haven't been there. And, sometimes people say like, I really want to go, I'll get out there at some point. You got to get out here at least once. Whether it's for a day trip, staying at the lodge, planning some sort of, paddling, boating, camping, backpacking trip, it is totally worth the time and effort.
Isle Royale is isolated and wild. It's an island surrounded by islands. It has no roads, and a cell signal is almost non-existent. On this adventure with me are Elizabeth Peterson, Cindy Baker, and Teal Rintala, 3 women I barely know and who are equally as eager and excited for 8 days on the island.
I can't imagine not wanting to come back. It's just one of the most magical, serene, beautiful, peaceful places.
Isle Royale takes a great deal of planning, researching, and preparing.
It's a commitment, so you got to be serious if you want to come to Isle Royale. And of course, it's difficult to get to, ferries and seaplanes and weather and all that stuff just plays a factor.
We started our journey in Copper Harbor and boarded the Isle Royale Queen Ferry on a rainy and foggy Friday morning. We have 55 miles of cold, clear Lake Superior waters between us and our destination. We arrived on Isle Royale in the fog, but as soon as we stepped out on the dock, the skies started to clear.
Many before you have made this same journey to this island wilderness, but your adventure here will truly be all your own.
So here we are in Isle Royale, also the closest I've been to the Canadian border. Scratch that, I've been to Detroit. Regardless, I'm still unsure how this beautiful island belongs to Michigan.
And to answer it, we gotta go way back in history, starting with the Treaty of Paris in 1783 after the Revolutionary War. The American delegation was in France, and there was a line that was drawn that said everything north of it went to the British and everything south of it went to the United States. And so we were south of it. And then fast forward to the 1830s, there was what was called the Battle of Toledo. So this was for the Toledo Strip, which is down near Toledo, Ohio, Lake Erie. So Michigan Territory said, we want it. Ohio says, we want it. Andrew Jackson says, stop fighting. This is what we're gonna do. Ohio, you can have the Toledo Strip. In exchange, Michigan, I will give you your statehood, most of what is now the present day UP, and Isle Royale. And if you ask me, I think Michigan won out better in the deal than Ohio did.
We are here the first month the park is open. It's spring and the trees are budding and the flowers are blooming right before our eyes. It's quiet. The island is coming back to life from its winter slumber, and National Park Service staff and visitors are slowly trickling in.
Over 99% of Isle Royale is federal wilderness. The park is only 210 square miles large. It's about 45 miles long, and at its widest point, 9 miles. So Isle Royale has 165 miles of trails and 36 campgrounds. I like to say that Isle Royale is a rock surrounded by a lot of rocks with water on top. So you can expect rocky conditions. Many of the trails are constructed out of pure bedrock, especially on the park's east end. There's not a lot of elevation on Isle Royale, but what it lacks in it, it makes up for in a tough topography underneath your feet.
Our plan was to backpack to a couple different campsites the first few days. Then take an inter-island ferry to Windigo on the southwest shore, spend a few days there exploring and talking to researchers of the Wolf Moose Project, and then take the inter-island ferry back around the north shore to Rock Harbor, where we would spend our last 2 nights exploring that area. I have a not-so-secret love affair with Lake Superior, so seeing every shoreline of Isle Royale was exciting for me. It felt like we were the only ones on the island at times. Being early in the season, we were able to stay in shelters the entire trip. Shelters are great to keep you and your gear dry and keep the bugs away, except we had almost 0 bugs and very little rain. It did rain twice briefly, and it was miserably hot on our second day.
It is hot. It's very hot. I think this shirt is going to lose its sleeves and become a sleeveless or a t-shirt or something because I did not pack for hot weather. The forecast was cool, 50s, and I swear it's got to be 80 out here. I don't know exactly what the temperature is, but it is warm. It's very warm. And yeah, excited to be here, and we're going to set up camp and cook some lunch, and then we are going to do some day hiking from here.
We took a 4-ish mile hike up to the Mount Ojibwe Tower, one of the high points on the island, and I swear it was over 80 degrees, but the views were worth it. So after our hike, I thought it would be a great idea to jump in Lake Superior, and I regretted that decision almost immediately.
By the way.
A thunderstorm did roll in that evening, and with it, a chilly and breezy morning. Isle Royale's weather is unpredictable, and you need to be prepared for anything. Thankfully, I didn't cut that long-sleeve shirt. Isle Royale, like the rest of the UP, has a rich history. Isle Royale is also called Manong, meaning the good place in Ojibwe.
So when you look historically at Isle Royale, there are two things that have brought people here: copper and fish. And this has been the case for thousands of years. It's still the case today, especially with fish. Archaeologists have found evidence of people coming here as far back as 5,000 or 6,000 years ago now. It was Indigenous peoples who were coming here for fish and for copper. That was the case for most of Isle Royale's human history, right? A big event that happened that really changed the course of Isle Royale's history was when Isle Royale was ceded from the Ojibwe to the United States government. That happened in the 1840s, and subsequently there was a lot of development that happened out here, especially with historic copper mining. There were 3 periods of boom and bust copper mining throughout the 19th century. Some of those mines did well, some of them did not. It was not near as successful as the Keweenaw copper mining history, which many folks in the UP are familiar with. In addition to, historic copper mining, there's a lot of commercial fishing, whether it was the American Fur Company in the 19th century up to different Scandinavian fishing families who are mostly Norwegian that came here in the later half of the 19th and early 20th centuries. There were fisheries scattered all around Isle Royale, and these were families who, would typically live on the mainland in the winter. They would migrate here in the spring and they would spend their summers. They would fish for a living. And then they would go back in the fall and do it all again the next year.
Isle Royale officially became a national park in 1940. In 2019, Isle Royale was designated as a traditional cultural property, and this year, the Grand Portage tribal flag will fly alongside the U.S. flag on the island. Our third day, we took the inter-island ferry to Windigo, located in Washington Harbor on the southwest end of the island. The name Windigo comes from the Windigo Mining Company, which sought copper here in the 1890s, and this is where the company town stood. The actual mine exploration was 2 miles inland and was the very last mine to operate on Isle Royale. Windigo is very protected within the harbor. At first, I wasn't in awe of Windigo because I didn't have that wide open view of Lake Superior, and I was disappointed in our campsite because, again, it wasn't on Lake Superior. Remember that love affair? By the next morning, my feelings had changed. Watching and listening to the songbirds and ducks and splashing in the river was soothing and serene. I want to paddle the creek on a morning like this. Its calm reflections, the chance of spotting a moose on the shore. I feel like I have the river to myself. Most mornings I was the first one up, and I quietly make myself a cup of coffee and sit and watch the day begin. Or take a hike a half mile down the trail to warm up after a frosty night in the shelter. My morning excursions were also in hopes of seeing a moose. On our 4th day, we finally spotted a moose on a trail outside of Windigo. Seeing a moose was number 1 on my Isle Royale wish list. We had other brief sightings the next couple days hiking around that area, and apparently one walked in front of our shelter while we were snoring one morning. The one morning I sleep in. Although our animal encounters were few and far between, signs of wildlife everywhere remind you that this is their home, and we are visitors. The moose and beavers keep busy changing the landscape. There are actually very few mammals who make Isle Royale their home.
Beavers are present, they're pretty important species. Otters are there. Red squirrels are present. These are all quite familiar species and maybe even seems in a way unremarkable that they're there. But here's what might be slightly more remarkable is who's not there. There's no gray squirrels. Gray squirrels never made it to Isle Royale. There's no skunks, no raccoons, no porcupines.
We did see a lot of birds. And more loons than I have ever seen in one place.
We have what we estimate to be about 1/3 of the state's loon population. So we have over 125 pairs of nesting loons.
The most famous animals of Isle Royale, though, are the wolves and moose. 5 years ago, the wolves nearly disappeared from Isle Royale, and just in the past few years, the National Park Service has relocated wolves to help control the moose population.
by March of, or let's just say April of 2020, we had about 12 to 14 wolves and then an unknown number of pups.
At least 2 good-sized litters of pups last year. Reasonably good survival. The pups, from all indications, which are just a few fragments of wolves on remote cameras and so forth, they look like they're well-developed and well-fed. So should be doing pretty well.
For the last few years, the moose population's been really high, around 1,800 moose to 2,000 moose. So that's quite a lot of animals on such a small island. And, every day a moose can eat quite a lot of vegetation, up to 30 pounds a day in the summertime.
In being so abundant, the moose, they were starting to have a pretty heavy impact on the forest of Isle Royale. And they really had depleted a great deal of their own food supply. And again, all very clearly because there were not enough wolves to control the moose population.
We'll dive deeper into the Isle Royale moose and wolves and hear more from the Michigan Tech researchers in a future episode. Isle Royale offers the ability to be still, and everything that happens when you do so.
On Isle Royale, you can take the time to pay attention if you so choose. Leave behind all those trappings of home, and you sit still long enough and a fox walks up to you, and you think, oh my goodness, it's right there. And then off it goes. Sit quietly somewhere. Just sit quietly. It's hard to do.
I came to really enjoy Windigo, and of the 2 main harbors, this one is my favorite. The vibe here is more low-key and rustic compared to Rock Harbor, which I felt was a little more official. We also got lucky, and the Windigo store was unofficially open 2 weeks early and stocked with much-needed snacks, toilet paper, wine, and beer. Sitting and watching the creek rise and fall as the tide came in and out, walking back to the harbor to watch the sunset or the fog lift off the water in the mornings. This is a great place to witness the many moods of Isle Royale. The same scene never looks the same twice. Our ferry trip around the North Shore back to Rock Harbor was smoother than our first, but still a little on the choppy side. I might have failed to mention earlier that our first inter-island ferry was thrilling for some of us and not so much for others. For the last 2 days, we explored the Rock Harbor area and trails. If you only have a day to spend on Isle Royale, there are short trails here to hike and get a taste of what the island is like.
Last day on Isle Royale, day 8. I am ready for a shower. I'm ready for some clean clothes, and I'm actually ready to just go back out there and do it again. And there's just so much to see here, and we were only on a small snippet of it. So, definitely want to come back again, explore more trails, maybe get out on some islands, do some fishing. Definitely want to do some fishing out here.
I think next time I'll do a through hike, stay up along the ridge on top. We didn't get up there this time just because of the way it all worked out. I'd also really like to see it at the end of the season. I've been here twice at the beginning of the season, and it's really neat to see the flowers blooming as you're walking and you start to see the life come back. But I'd also like to see what that looks like in full bloom at the end of the season.
Once you've been to Isle Royale, you're hooked. It's an addiction you must feed every year. I met one man on the ferry who was on his 14th trip. Others we talked to have even more trips under their belts. A couple folks I chatted with walking down the trail in Windigo gave me the perfect answer as to why it's the most revisited national park. The first time you get your bearings, a feel for the island, and an understanding of the island's layout and how to get around. The second time you have a clearer idea of where you want to go and how you want to get there, and see all the things you didn't get to see the first time. There is so much to experience on Isle Royale.
Words can't even capture how gorgeous this place is and what it does to your insides when you're here walking around on the trails and you encounter a moose or you encounter some wildlife and eagles. Yeah, it's pretty magical. It's a wonderful, wonderful place to visit.
As we waited for our ferry to bring us back to the mainland, we watched others arrive, a familiar eagerness on their faces as they stepped foot on Isle Royale for the first time, or perhaps their 20th.
Well, that's it for this week. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next week right here on Upper Michigan's very own Discovering.